Well, schools should clearly be a safe zone from racism and division. Yet the New South Wales Education Department is on the brink of caving into the Greens. They agreed today, the Education Department that is, to review a directive advising public schools on whether to stay neutral on the Israel-Gaza war. This shocking capitulation comes after New South Wales Greens MP Abigail Boyd said students want to show their support for Palestine. Have a look.
Palestinian students have not been allowed to wear their keffiyeh at school, that they haven't been able to have a Palestinian flag on their bags. We're not neutral on most crimes. Why would we be neutral on war?
Well, to discuss this and more, let's bring in now Hollywood actor Nate Buzz. Great to see you again, Nate.
Thanks for having me.
What do you think about this? The New South Wales Education Department potentially, well, they've agreed to review whether schools have to stay neutral on the war.
Yeah, look, I think what we have to remind ourselves of is when people have been wearing the keffiyehs and when they've been waving the Palestinian flag for the last 10 months around Australia, it's been directly connected to violent chants and threats. And so I just don't think it's a fitting place to bring this into schools where, young minds can be influenced to think a certain way when what's happening in Israel and Gaza is far more complicated than just a nationality or an ethnicity.
I mean, we talk about the indoctrination of children. That's what is going on in Gaza with young Palestinian children. We don't want that in Australia at all. I mean, at a time when the Prime Minister is looking at bringing in thousands, he's issued 3,000 visas to Gazans, and the people there have been indoctrinated, they've been brought up to hate Israel and hate Jews. Do you think it would be worrying to bring people here without adequate security vetting?
Well, I think what it reveals is, the current Palestinian movement, its use of radicalisation with the youth, which happens in Gaza. The IDF have come across countless examples where a young generation of people in Gaza, in the West Bank, are being taught to not only hate Israel, but also to become martyrs for a cause of jihad. And so the same people who are funneling this to the youth in the Middle East are now trying to do this in Australia. That's concerning, that's alarming, because what they're creating is a radicalisation problem. Now, look, we saw Taylor Swift have to cancel 2 concerts in Vienna because of radical plans from young men who wanted to commit violent crimes because they felt they were doing something for a Palestinian movement. We saw people having their throats slit in Germany, again, by being influenced by the radicalisation of this Free Palestine movement. So the fruits of this movement is showing to be around the world very, very violent, and Australia is going to have to accept the fact that if something like that happens, those who have been allowing this to go on are going to be directly responsible. Blood is going to be on their hands because they're allowing this sort of speech and this movement to live, to breathe, and to be affecting young minds all over Australia.
Look, when October 7 broke out, you were splitting your time between Australia and Hollywood. You then felt very strongly about the issue of anti-Semitism and Israel as well, and you've now living you're spending quite a lot of time in Israel. Yeah. From your time there, do you think that a lot of the Palestinians do support Hamas?
Yes, without a doubt. Unfortunately, that's the reality on the ground. If there was a vote to take place in Gaza or the West Bank tomorrow, Hamas would win unanimously. I think the greatest problem that I'm seeing is most people who are weighing in on this conversation have never been to Israel, have never fully understand the conflict that has been unfolding for 76 plus years. And so, my time, my experience, I've got 2 examples. I've been chatting to a lot of Gazans in Gaza right now, trying to build some sort of relationship and conversation with them. I'm looking for people who may feel that Hamas has led them down a destructive road. But every single conversation I'm having with young Gazans is that they're fully in support of not only what Hamas is doing, but what they did on October 7th. Now, most Australians, I think you and I would agree, if we showed them the raw footage and showed them the facts of what Hamas did in 8 hours in Israel, killing 1,200 innocent Israelis. I'm talking people in their family home, women, children being murdered, young people at a music festival. Most Australians would say this is not acceptable and I can't get behind this. And what they need to realise is that most people supporting the Palestinian movement are fully in support of not only Hamas, but the events of October 7th. Now, here's where the hypocrisy starts. You'll see a lot of pro-Palestinian supporters referring to the current Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, as a Hitler type. And they'll even call Israel's military operation similar to what the Nazis were doing to the Jews in the 1930s and the 1940s. And yet in the same breath, they celebrate and glorify what Hitler did to the Jews. So their own message is full of hypocrisy.
Very confused.
Yeah.
Now, because of your advocacy for Israel and the Jewish people, you've received horrific death threats, hundreds of death threats, massive cost to you personally for your security, and also 2 actors from one of your own shows in Hollywood have shunned you. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so one of the main actors on the TV show that I worked in refuses to be in photos with me because of my stands for Israel. Now, look, I'm not upset with him because he's just being fed the Palestinian narrative over and over again, and he's looking out for his career. But, you know, the death threats is a great example of what's really at the heart of this movement. You know, it's a sad reality when you take a stance and the people that for the Palestinian movement feel that their only option is to use violence. And so, you know, I was in Berlin shooting a Sunglasser campaign, and I had many pro-Palestinian supporters trying to track me down so they could harm me in some way. You know, and people often say to me, why do you do this, Nate? Why do you put yourself at risk if the result is going to be potential violence from those who support the Palestinian movement? But the fact that people are trying to threaten me for standing with Israel and trying to remove my voice with violence is further proof why it's so important that we actually stand up and stand with the Israelis as they continue to deal with this violence, not only from Hamas, but also from Hezbollah in the north, who has been using provocation over and over again since the 7th of October. I mean, to this date, they've shot 8,000 rockets towards northern Israel. 8,000. I mean, what nation would deal with this? You know, what would Albanese do if the Australian people were being bombarded with rocket attacks from our neighbours?
Well, he criticises Israel all the time for how it's fighting the war.
Look, Albanese has never been in a situation where he's had to protect the well-being and the safety of Australians. You know, maybe his biggest concern is which sporting event he'll attend on a Friday night. You know, Benjamin Netanyahu, whether you like him or not, is in one of the most difficult positions right now because he not only has threats from the north, he doesn't have threats just from Gaza, but he also has the Islamic regime threatening the entire nation of Israel every single day. And sadly, Iran. And sadly, you know, the world wants to give them nuclear capabilities. I mean, this is a very, very dangerous time for the Middle East. More than that, this is going to affect the world. You know, what happens in Israel is flowing over into the world. You can see that in the protests.
Yeah, exactly. Anti-Semitism and lawlessness and aggression in every major city. Nate Buzz, you have been one of the most powerful defenders of the Jewish community, particularly in the past 10 months. So thank you so much for your strong voice. And for anyone who doesn't know you, well, you've got, 3.5 million followers on Instagram, so everyone can follow your interviews and conversations there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.